It seems like one thing the Trump administration may be missing is how these partnerships between Russia, China, and Iran actually work. They're not based on pressure or interference, but on mutual cooperation and respect for each other's core interests. Do you think Washington is misunderstanding this dynamic? And how might that affect expectations around China's role in upcoming talks?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Whatever he asks, he's got very little leverage. Maybe he wants to see if he can get China to pressure Iran to back off and to stop, and China's not going to do that. I think the U.S. delegation is operating on the assumption that because China is on paper a major importer of oil, that it's under more pressure than the United States with respect to that shortage, and therefore will be looking for a way out. But I put up a piece at sonar21.com last night that lays out, and it's based upon a video done by Kevin Wamsley, who he lives in China. He's actually from the area where I live in Florida, it's Sarasota. And he walks through in detail that actually China is not vulnerable in the way that the West thinks. They're just the opposite. They have a much more stable, predictable path forward. And this is where the Western experts consistently overestimate China's fragility and underestimate China's resiliency. And we're going to see that this week, where Trump thinks he's got some pressure, can leverage China. Except let's look at what China's doing. Not only does it have the top 4 banks in the world, but it's starting to unload U.S. treasuries. It's not buying them, it's getting rid of them, and it's buying up gold and silver. It's setting up an alternative payment system to SWIFT called CIPS, Cross-Border Interbank Payment System. So, and China's reaching out to establish commercial relations with countries around the world, whereas the United States is doing all in its power to try to damage China. Again, if I'm the Chinese, I'm not sure I'd take the meeting with Trump. I'd tell him just go pound sand, because everything that the Trump administration has done has been involving sanctions against China or against different Chinese companies. It's not, we're not sending them a thank you note for anything. And we saw how that backfired early on in the, a year ago with the trade sanctions, the tariffs, that Chinese said, okay, we'll stop buying U.S. soybeans. The soybean market in the United States basically crashed. And because they said, well, we'll buy from Brazil. Brazil makes plenty of soybeans. Exactly what happened. So, Trump's actions hurt American farmers, didn't protect them, and made them more vulnerable. So I see, China knows how to play that game. They are much, much smarter at it than the United States is.
With rising casualties and pressure on Israel's defenses, including strains on systems like Iron Dome, how sustainable is its current military position?
So what? Okay, they're sending their aircraft carrier. What's it going to do? I mean, really, what can it do? Well, it's got to stay far enough offshore that it doesn't get blown out of the water, number one. If the Europeans start launching strikes on Iranian positions in and around that Strait of Hormuz, Iran, then Europe now becomes part and parcel of that war, and they'll further. Europe is the next domino to fall after Asia. Asia's starting to fall, and then it's going to be Europe will be next on the chopping block, because it's going to be ravaged by the dramatic rise in the price of oil and price of gas and diesel fuel and aviation fuel.
With Iran warning it will strike U.S. bases and warships in response to tanker attacks, how do you see this escalation unfolding? especially with Trump's upcoming trip to China?
Well, yeah. So let's see. Right now, it is like where I'm. It's 10:30. So in China, it's 10:30, 11:30 at night on the 11th. So in a couple hours, it's going to be the 12th. Donald Trump is going to have to leave. I don't know if he departs today for China or because, you figure, well, what is it, about 16-hour flight, 15, 16-hour flight to Beijing. So let's see, 12 to tonight. Yeah, so if he leaves tonight or maybe first thing tomorrow morning on the 12th, but to get in there, he's there for the 13th, the 14th, and then he said he comes home on the 15th. So we're looking at, while he is heading to China, I don't think you're going to see any dramatic military moves by the United States against Iran. There's not going to be a new spate of bombings or missile attacks or anything like that. They're trying to keep it contained. And I think Iran is content to sit back and not initiate an attack right now. In fact, I think they were asked by China to not retaliate. When the United States hit the Russian ships or the Iranian ships late last week, Iran very well. I expected Iran was going to retaliate, and they didn't. Now you say they didn't because they were afraid, or they didn't because they didn't have the capability. No, I think they didn't because they'd been asked by China, let's keep this under control, because China and Russia, I think they're making some significant progress on creating a new security architecture for the Persian Gulf, one that will put Saudis and Qataris in concert with Iran in a mutually beneficial collaborative effort, as opposed to this bifurcated conflict-based model that the United States has imposed. The U.S. model is, the security structure erected under the U.S. direction is being destroyed. It's coming down. So now what we're looking at is this new security architecture that the Chinese and Russians are actively working to create.
With reports that Trump will leave Beijing on Friday, do you think his return could coincide with a new phase of escalation?
So if he lands in Beijing on the 13th, so tomorrow, Tuesday in the United States at 6 p.m. Eastern time, that is 6 a.m. on the 13th in China. You see what I'm saying? So the time taking this, so he'll get back to the United States on Friday, not Saturday. But the odd thing, so he'll leave here on Tuesday to arrive there on Wednesday. And so I suspect if he goes out first thing tomorrow morning, then he'll be getting into China somewhere like 9 a.m. on Wednesday morning Chinese time. The Chinese may make it clear to him if you renew conflict with Iran, you're going to be fighting us. So depends on what messages are delivered. There are some that argue that China doesn't care at all about Iran. It's just, we'll cut it loose in a heartbeat. Boy, they couldn't be more wrong. Iran figures in an important role in the future of China's economic growth. It's another important crossroads for trade, both overland and via railroad, as well as its access to the Indian Ocean. Yeah, that's why it's so ridiculous listening to the Trump folks, thinking that, this blockade, boy, we got Iran bottled up. There's no way they can't. They're cut off. They're isolated. They're not going to get any more trade. And meanwhile, Russia can supply food, whatever material that Iran needs through the Caspian. The Chinese provide it through the railroad line that runs through Tashkent, and the Pakistanis provided over seven overland routes out of Pakistan. It's just, it's just an indictment of the incompetence of the Trump administration.
Reports suggest Iran may be able to overwhelm the air defenses of U.S. destroyers in the Persian Gulf. How significant is this development?
Yeah, I don't know how the vertical launch system on the destroyers works. And what I mean by that, I don't know if it's capable. So you got like 45, let's say you got 50 missiles forward and then 40 missiles in the back of the ship. And, can they fire them all at once? I mean, at an incoming target, or do they have to fire them one consecutively? I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is, but I suspect it's more the latter than the former. So that means with the drone swarm, you're going to hit some, but not all. And I think the Iranians actually have hit U.S. naval vessels and have damaged them, which is, I think, one other reason why the United States is itself backed off from doing anything too provocative in the Strait of Hormuz.
After Netanyahu suggested seizing Iran's enriched uranium, possibly even by force, how realistic is such a strategy?
Well, again, I think there's a lot based upon assumption in the planning for this. Assumption number one is that Iran has consolidated all of the 60% enriched uranium at one location. If I was a military planner, I wouldn't do that. I'd spread it out. I'd get it located in different places. Second, the assumption that Iran has not stepped up security at those sites to detect both inbound attacks and then to resist an attack. I know firsthand from an exercise I worked on, helped write, and then execute from 20 years ago that entailed sending a U.S. Special Operations Forces team into Iran to attack a particular nuclear site. It was called a hardened, deeply buried target, HDBT. And under that scenario, Iran didn't know we were coming, so we had the element of surprise. But even then, it turned out to be, let's call it a very, very difficult mission, if not a mission impossible. And now that was then where they didn't know, with that scenario, they didn't know we were coming. Now we're looking at one where we've announced it, or at least that's our intention. So I don't think that the Iranian general staff, the IRGC, that they're sitting around ignoring that. I think instead they've taken measures to both bolster security at those sites.
If key Iranian capabilities remain intact despite the war, what realistic strategy is left for the U.S. and Israel moving forward?
Well, what we can come up with logically is not going to be put into place practically. The logic would suggest that the only way to end this fighting is for Israel to concede that the Palestinians deserve a state, a nation, an independent country that is full sovereignty over its people, over its territory, over its resources, and that Israel must get out, must abandon that. Israel's not going to do that. They are locked into a mindset about their country that doesn't have any room for a Palestinian state. So this conflict is going to continue until such time as Israel is no longer capable of sustaining the fight, or the Palestinians are no longer capable of sustaining the fight. What I think the likely outcome is that Israel will fail. And the combination of it's increasingly alienated its support within the United States. And the recent attacks on Christianity and Christians in both Israel and Lebanon is turning more and more Christians in the United States against Israel. They see it as just a vicious genocidal state. And then to that extent, how many members of Congress will continue to support sending billions of dollars to Israel? That's going to get cut back. So Israel really could be on the outs. And you've got Alistair Crook just recently published, or his wife. What they do is Ashley goes in and she reads the Hebrew press and then reprints what is being said in these articles. And it's stunning what has been said of late, that the Israelis have lost their way, and that their attempt to stay in this constant state of war is destroying the country.
With rising casualties and pressure on Israel's defenses, including strains on systems like Iron Dome, how sustainable is its current military position?
Well, even that doesn't work. We've seen because in that case, if the Iron Dome was so great, why didn't it shoot down that drone? It failed. So let me just read a couple of quotes to you from this piece that Alistair sent out. Senior military commentator Alon Ben David on the moral and disciplinary breakdown permeating the IDF, the near total dysfunction of public systems, and Israel's moral breakdown. This IDF chief, Zamir, will be required to return the IDF to the fundamentals of order, values, and discipline in a society that's breaking away from all of its norms. Then there's an article by a major Yitzhak Brick called Illusions of Victory. Israel's political and military echelons lied. Iranian ballistic missiles were not intercepted at all. Sometimes David Sling missiles were launched just to create the appearance of an interception attempt. Then retired Colonel Eldad Shavit, Trump has already tried to sell the American public and the world the image of victory against Iran. However, it has repeatedly become clear that this narrative is unfounded. And then finally, they comment on how the drones are changing the nature of the war, something that Israel is completely unprepared for, despite having watched for the last 4 years what's been going on in Ukraine. So Israel is in trouble, and maybe there's a sort of a metaphor at work here, because here is Bibi Netanyahu. His appearance on 60 Minutes, he looks terrible. He's losing weight. He's becoming more gaunt. He's not the fat body he once was. But that's attributable to the fact that he has prostate cancer, and the cancer's eating away at him. So he may not be alive by the end of this year, which is they'll at least change the political dynamics inside Israel. I'm not sure it'll convince the Israelis to give up their quest to destroy Iran, destroy Hezbollah, destroy Hamas.
Has Israel resolved the security issues that led to its operations in southern Lebanon, or are those problems still ongoing?
I think Israel will be compelled to withdraw their forces from southern Lebanon in the next couple of weeks, because as you rightly point out, they are taking so many casualties now from these drones. In previous incursion into southern Lebanon back in 2006, Israel didn't face off against drones. They had to worry about RPGs being fired at them and some crude missiles. But now it's a game changer what they're up against. So, and it's inflicting severe, significant equipment loss as well as significant casualties. And Israel's not big enough to sustain casualties like this.
Do you think the global attitude toward Muslims and the tendency to demonize Islam is changing, especially in the United States?
Well, again, it goes back to I'll call it a historical prejudice. It is widely believed, and it's perpetrated within the Christian community, that Muslims hate Christians, and that Muslims are they're sneaky. That they'll come tell you one thing, but they're going to do the exact opposite to you. And that's where and so as a result, and this goes back to the rise of the Muslim the emergence of Islam in the 8th century or 7th century, and then it spread throughout the region, culminating in the wars that took place in Europe, in Turkey, in Spain, that beating back the Muslim advance. So they've always been portrayed in this way as, violently opposed to Christianity, except when you actually get into the theology, it is the Muslims, and I'm excluding the Sunni, the Wahhabis, those extremists, the Deobandis, they are completely intolerant. But the vast majority of Islam is quite tolerant and celebrates Jesus as a prophet. And they celebrate the Mother Mary, his Mother Mary, as a holy woman. Whereas the Jews, just the opposite. They don't see Jesus as anything. He's a nobody, and Mary's a whore. And so this notion that the one who really is violently opposed to Christianity are the Jews, or the Zionists. I think the Zionists is a better way to phrase it. But and that what this is leading to is this erosion of support for Israel in the United States. It's going to become a critical factor going forward. Israel's becoming more isolated, not less. And the willingness, a few years back for the Gulf Arabs to embrace something like the Abraham Accord, UAE may do that, but nobody else is going to go along.
Do you think Trump is trying to distance himself from the JCPOA because any new Iran deal would be harder to secure and even less favorable politically?
Okay, let's be precise with language. Far worse for whom? And I'd encourage all your both listeners and viewers to go look up JCPOA and read what was the actual substance of that agreement. It was pretty onerous on Iran. Iran, in a way, sort of desperately signed on to that because it was up against both China and Russia at the time were willing to back, continued sanctions on Iran. So Iran wanted to get out from under those sanctions. Yeah, so this goes back to the other point you made earlier. I don't see Iran eager to return to a JCPOA framework at all. They're going to assert that we're a sovereign nation. We have the right to enrich uranium as we see fit, but we will remain signatories to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and we will continue to, and we'll set up a regimen that IAEA inspectors can come in periodically to determine that we're not building a nuke, and that we have no intention of building a nuke. That would be that'd be sort of the ideal agreement from Iran's standpoint, which the United States wouldn't accept, I don't think. But Iran's in a completely different mood now. There's, like I said, we're a sovereign nation, and we're not going to be treated with disrespect, which, I get that.
Do you see divisions within the GCC, and how might countries like Oman, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia fit into a reshaped regional security order involving Iran, Russia, and China?
Well, that when you look at the real economics of it, probably the most, let's say, diversified commodity economy in the Gulf is that of Qatar, because Qatar dealt with both aluminum exports, they dealt with export of urea, they're the second largest producer in the world of helium. The biggest oil producer is Saudi Arabia. So I see Russia and China focusing first on those two, on the Saudis and Qataris, because Bahrain's so small, as is Kuwait, that they'll have no choice but to either try to go it on their own, which they can't, or accede to the fact, hey, Saudi and Qatar are leading the way to, closer relationship, working relationship with Iran. I see the Iranians actually being willing to be quite accommodating. That's going to leave UAE isolated, and Iran took the first step 3 days ago, when they hit Fujairah, the port, to basically close off further oil exports out of UAE. Apart from that, UAE is a fantasy. I liken it to I call it a cross between Disneyland and Las Vegas, because it is oriented towards the very wealthy. It's oriented towards sort of a party lifestyle. Hookers, were prevalent throughout. They went there to make their money, like did other members of East Asia or West Asia, to go get a job, serve all these wealthy Westerners that were flocking there. Yeah, this is this security architecture, as described it earlier. The original architecture was creating U.S. military presence to reassure the countries that as long as we're here, nobody's going to attack you. And hey, while we're here, why don't you spend a couple of $100 billion on buying some U.S. treasuries from us, and then you can also buy our military equipment. That'd be great. Well, it really wasn't a great relationship. It put those the Gulf Arabs in sort of a dependence condition. Then comes February 28th, and all of a sudden, the security guarantees from the West go right out the door. West can't protect them at all, and Iran makes that very clear. We can come in and bomb your critical bases and critical infrastructure. So that I think has caused some of these countries, particularly Qatar and Saudi Arabia, to step back and reassess. Do we really need to stay in this kind of tight relationship with Washington? Or here's Russia and China proposing something brand new, and there are financial incentives in it for us. Usually the relationship with the United States requires, hey, you got to give us money. Let us not come in and say, let us show how we can both make money off of this deal, which is how China and Russia approach it.
Do you think Trump's tendency to blame previous presidents for current conflicts is weakening his position, especially as the situation in Ukraine and the Middle East escalates under his own administration?
Well, yeah, he's becoming more erratic. And I think this trip to China is going to be he's hoping they can come out and declare a great victory. I don't see it happening, but we'll see. If he comes out of that and then re-ups the bombings on the renewed attack on Iran, then this war is going to enter another phase that's going to be very, very destructive for both Israel and the United States, and very also damaging to the global economy, making things worse, not better. They're already bad. We haven't seen the full effects that are going to come to pass. So, this is Trump is not in control. That's the best way to look at it. He thinks he is, but he's lost the agenda.
Given past claims about sending troops to Ukraine and now talk of deploying naval forces to the Middle East after a peace deal, how realistic are these plans for maintaining peace?
Well, I was just asking, what exactly are you going to do? Are you going to sell into the Strait of Hormuz so the Iranians can blow the hell out of your ship? Well, that'll send a message. Or they're going to send, you send the aircraft carrier, so you got combat aircraft on board the plane that's going to fly out and attack Iranian positions. Okay, then you've now expanded the war. And also you got to figure out how are you going to refuel all those aircraft. I guess they'll use the NATO KC-135s as one possible method to offset, trying to provide their own. Yeah, no, this is, again, let's step back and say, what is the purpose? What's the goal? Oh, we want to open the Strait of Hormuz. Okay, explain to me how you do that. When to ultimately open the Strait of Hormuz, you have to eliminate the potential of strikes by short range and intermediate range ballistic missiles and drones, which are launched from the interior of Iran. They're not out there on the coast. Iran, they do have defenses there on the coast. I'm not saying they don't. And they have robust defenses on the coast that in and of themselves are difficult enough to defeat. But let's assume that you can defeat those, what do you do about this stuff, these launch sites that are, 100, 200 miles inside Iran?
What do we actually know about Europe's role in producing missiles and interceptor systems for Israel? And how integrated is this supply chain with U.S. and Israeli defense production?
They're producing for Israel? With what? No, I don't think so. And I'm not sure that they got access to the rare earth minerals that are essential for those productions anyway. Yeah, no, Europe's a nobody now. We've watched, they still exist on paper. They still have great historical sites to visit. But they used to be the agenda setter in the 19th century. They were leading in the realm of scientific investigations and in industrializations, producing products. They were stealing great wealth from their colonies around the world. But then comes World War I. That destroys a generation of men and begins the unraveling of the various colonial empires, not just with the Brits, but with the French, with the Germans, with the Dutch. And then World War II sort of seals the fate. And so since then, they're all trying to be relevant. And, the operation that the Brits mounted in, was it 82, 81 at the Falklands, they couldn't do that today. They don't have the ability. So they've lost out on that front. They militarily, they really have nothing to offer. They're no longer a leading source of scientific ideas and research. Their strength as a financial capital, that's eroded as well. There's a lot of focus. This guy, Tom Luongo, is always big about, City of London, City of London, City of London. And you know what? Look at the City of London. HSBC is the only bank in the top 10. And it's like number 8 or 9. So it's not the enormous player that everybody's got to pay attention to. And the Chinese banks are going in a whole different direction, again, outside the Western model. So again, Europe is not only a shadow of its former self. It's really, I would argue, it's no longer relevant. It can be a nuisance and it can make threats, but in terms of actual having industrial production to produce anything for Israel, good luck with that.